In this video, I'll talk about what biologists mean by the word evolution. What are we actually talking about? What processes count as biological evolution? This was a question that Darwin wouldn't totally understand because he didn't have an understanding of genetics. He marshaled a lot of evidence about evolution and could describe natural selection, but our full understanding of what evolution is and what constitutes evolution really couldn't come about until we appreciated genetics. So in a previous video, I talked about different things that evoke evolution and different processes that we would use to characterize evolution. So for example, the movement or the progression over time from a black void of the universe to our Earth teeming with life, so from no life to life, the progression of different clades, cladogenesis occurring as life evolved from single cells to multiple cells on many millions of years later to tetrapods, dinosaurs, and birds. The variation in morphs within a population and selection working back and forth to favor one morph or another, or the evolution of variability within a trait. For example, dark-furred primates evolving into humans which don't have much hair but do vary widely in the pigmentation of our skin. All of these things are related to or indicate different types of evolution. So what are their common similarities? Underlying all of these, in order for all of these processes to happen, there needs to be heritable genetic change. So all forms of biological evolution involve heritable genetic change. This quote from Sadava et al., the textbook Life, the Science of Biology, states it pretty well. They say, in a biological sense, evolution refers specifically to change in the genetic makeup of a population over time. So there's several key things here. First, I want to highlight it has to do with genetics. It has to do with changing in the frequency of mutations, the frequency of alleles. Next, another key aspect is that it is a population level phenomenon. It is change in the genetic makeup of a population, a collection and aggregation of interbreeding individuals of the same species. And it has to take place over time. Second, a follow-up quote from Sadava et al. That further hammers this down is evolution is genetic change across generations of a population. It takes time and it happens at the population level. Individuals do not evolve, populations do. Individuals do not evolve within their lifespan, and evolution doesn't happen between an individual and its offspring. Evolution happens at the population scale, takes multiple generations, it takes time. Mutations provide the raw material for evolution. In order for new clades of organisms to emerge, in order for new versions of traits to evolve, there has to be mutations to provide the raw material for evolution to act on. So for example, here is the sequence from two subspecies of mouse that are for the MCR1 gene, and for several hundred bases. So here are two species. Here's one subspecies, subgresus, and then the second subspecies is leucocephalus. This indicates the sequence in the subgresus subspecies. The dots here indicate that it is the exact same sequence for here. So for this first line indicates bases 1 to 90. The second set of lines here from 91 to 180. And then this third set of lines. So far, the sequences are entirely identical until we get to around 235, where there's a difference between G and T right here. So this is a single mutation that actually has been found to result in a major phenotypic difference between these two subspecies. The subgresus subspecies is brown and tends to inhabit darker soils. The leucocephalus subspecies is light. They have this T, where subgresus has G, and they are lighter colored. They tend to live on lighter colored soils and sand. So a difference of a single mutation results in a different phenotype. And their studies have indicated that there's an evolutionary advantage, depending on habitat, to have one allele or another, to have a G or a T at this place in the MCR1 gene. It has to be remembered that somatic mutations throughout the body of an organism, throughout the regular tissues of an organism, do not result in evolutionary change. So mutation in heart tissue, lung tissue, brain tissue, skin tissue, they do not result in heritable evolution. Progeny from an organism with mutations anywhere in their body except their gametes just results in normal progeny. It's only germline tissue in gametogenic tissue, ovaries or testes. Mutations in that tissue can result in mutant progeny. So it can result in sperm that are produced that have a mutation, or eggs that are produced that have a mutation. Of course, because we're talking about diploid organisms here, unless both parents have the mutation, normal progeny can be produced. It also depends on whether the mutation is dominant or recessive. I guess it depends on whether you're referring to the mutant genotype or a mutant phenotype, but that's a secondary issue. So the spread of a germline mutation, it's not just mutations that provide the fodder for evolution. Germline mutations provide the fodder for evolution. And these mutations have to spread over multiple generations. So if a mutation occurs and it shows up in the progeny, and then those progeny pass on the mutation, and those progeny pass on the mutation over multiple generations, if this germline mutation spreads, then evolution has occurred. Germline mutations, whether it is a single base pair of DNA that's affected, a single amino acid, a chromosome inversion, these can create new alleles. So if the original parent is big A, they have a somatic mutation, their offspring will all be big A. However, if they have a germline mutation, they could produce normal offspring that are big A, little a, or big A, or they could produce mutant offspring. They could produce offspring that are big A, or they could produce mutant offspring that carry that mutation. And then the mutation, as long as they carry that little a here is representing the germline mutation, as long as they carry that mutation, they are considered mutated or mutant, and they have a mutant genotype, though they still might have a mutant phenotype if it's a recessive mutation. So we can say not just the increase in a germline mutation, but it's the increase in a new allele in a population over time is evolution. Sometimes we'll use the term mutation, sometimes we'll use the term allele. Fortunately, biologists are not totally consistent in this. Key thing to remember, a key take-home message of this video is that the increase of any allele in a population over time is evolution. Increase in any allele in population for any reason is evolution. So I'll show some examples of the main ways that this can occur. So the simple spread of a mutation in a population is considered evolution. And sometimes there are genes or parts of the genome that are susceptible to mutation. So if the mutation is consistently happening year after year, the same mutation occurs, it can maintain a mutant allele in the population just through mutation. So if we have a population of this type of mouse and this G, each generation, this G consistently mutates to T in some individual's germline, then it will maintain that mutation, it'll maintain that allele in the population just by mutation. It's not a particularly efficient way or fast way of evolution. It usually, if it's just mutation alone that's causing the allele to be there, it'll usually be at a pretty low frequency. But that's still considered evolution because the mutation is increasing the frequency of the mutant allele in the population. Perhaps best known for evolution, natural selection on beneficial alleles, or also natural selection against detrimental alleles, is also a form of evolution. So actually these mice have been studied, and researchers have looked at predation rates of these mice with different phenotypes and therefore different genotypes when they're on different types of substrate. So the brown mice, the brown subspecies of mice, they tend to occur on brown soils, and they tend to have lower predation rates when they're on brown soils. The white subspecies tend to occur on lighter substrates, lighter soils, and they tend to have lower predation rates. If you move a brown mouse onto lighter soils, they tend to get eaten more often. If you move a light mice onto brown soils, they tend to get eaten more often. So this has been done experimentally by taking 2 mice and putting them into a pen with dark soil. So taking a brown mouse and a white mouse, putting into a pen with dark soil, also taking a dark mouse and a light mouse and putting into a pen with light soil and looking at the predation rates. So for the light-colored mice, when you take a light mouse and put it into a pen with light soil, previous research has shown they have about a 35% chance, 0.35 probability of being eaten. So brown mouse and a white mouse put into a pen, about 35% of the time, 0.35, the white mouse is eaten. You take that white mouse and a brown mouse and put it into a dark soil, the white mouse tends to get eaten 60% of the time, or with a 0.6 probability. So the white mouse's probability of being eaten is much lower when it's on light soil. So we would call this selection for white mouse being on white soil, or selection against white mouse being on the dark soil. Artificial selection is analogous to natural selection. It also results in evolution. We normally say we have bred dogs. We could also think we have evolved dogs in different directions through artificial selection. We have shaped their phenotypes and genotypes and genomes by selecting them artificially for different traits. A less well-known process for causing evolution is when a part of a population randomly is killed off and the remainders go on to found the subsequent population. And if the remaining population, the remaining survivors, don't represent all of the original genetic diversity of the original population, that will lead to evolution through what's called a bottleneck, a genetic bottleneck. So let's say we have an initial population. We look at just a single locus, the A locus, and there's a mix of individuals that are big A, big A, little a, little a, and there's a mix of individuals of all of these genotypes. Well, let's say there's a random event like a lightning storm, kills off most of the individuals of the population, totally random. There's nothing, this genotype, phenotype at the A locus doesn't impact whether you're struck by lightning or not. But just due to random chance, all of the individuals that were big A, are killed. Most of the individuals that are big A, the heterozygotes, are killed. And the few remaining individuals, 1 is big A, and 2 are little a. So we would call this a genetic bottleneck. These 3 remaining individuals can go on to breed and the population can increase in size. But in this new population, most of the individuals will be little a, and then some of the individuals will be big A, heterozygotes. Eventually, big A homozygotes will appear, but the little a allele will be much more common. We consider this change from big A and little a both being common to little a being the most common allele. We consider that to be evolution through this genetic bottleneck, because even though there's no natural selection going on, it's simply due to random chance, it is still a change in the frequency of genes. It's a change in the frequency of the little a allele. Another process that doesn't involve natural selection necessarily, but that can lead to evolution, is the influx of immigrants into a population. So a classic case study here is a study of the Lake Erie water snake. It's a subspecies of water snake. There are three morphs. We typically talk about two morphs. There's the banded morph and the unbanded morphs. These are all the same subspecies. They can interbreed, but depending on their genotype, they have different color patterns. So the banded morph has stripes and patches. The unbanded morph is a consistent color. Now, they occur in islands off the coast of Ohio or between Ohio and Ontario. The banded morph occurs both on the mainland of Ohio here and also occurs throughout the islands out in Lake Erie. The unbanded morph, that's a consistent brown color, only occurs on the islands. It does not occur on the mainland. The banded morph is known to, it's a water snake. It can disperse, it can travel through the water, and it regularly, individuals from the mainland will swim out to the islands. So there's therefore a mix of the banded and unbanded morphs out on the islands. Simply by swimming out to the islands and interbreeding, bringing their genes, there's genes that underlie this banded morph, bringing those genes into the population is a form of evolution. It increases the frequency of those genes in the island population. That is a form of evolution. So again, any process that changes the frequency of genes or changes the frequency of mutations or changes the frequency of alleles at the population level over time results in evolution. So consistent rates of mutation in the same gene can result in evolution. Natural selection is what we often focus on. Selection for a particular phenotype and therefore increases the frequency of that genotype in the population. Artificial selection can carry out the similar process. Genetic bottlenecks, the random survival of a subset of the population, can bias the frequency of genes into the future. Also, I left it off here, but immigration, all of those processes, simply by changing the frequency of genes, of alleles, of mutants, however we want to say it, all of those processes result in evolution. And again, it's a population process. It is a genetic process, happens at the population level, not at the individual level.